Hello, my name's Peter Larson. If you're here for the discussion with Samah Sabawi, you're at the right place. We're allowing people to come in now. The conversation will be starting in just a few moments. This is one of a series of monthly webinars with experienced people from around the world. Today, Samah actually lives in Australia, but she is going to be helping us think through the future of Palestine, and we'll be starting in just a few minutes. While I'm waiting for the webinar to begin, I start off usually with a land acknowledgement, which in the case of Canada and the Israel-Palestine question is very relevant because we're talking about dispossession of peoples, colonization, and so on. And I'm doing this webinar from Ottawa, Canada, on still unceded Indigenous territory. So with that, I'd like to introduce Samah. Welcome, Samah. Thank you so much for joining us today, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. It's wonderful that you could make time for us.
Thanks, Peter, for having me. And I'm really pleased to be speaking to my Canadian friends and to the larger community, especially in Ottawa, where I once lived and belonged. I am, of course, coming at you from Larm in Wurundjeri country, and I pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land I live and work upon, the Kulin Nation, and also to their elders past and present. And I do extend this acknowledgement to all First Nations people on the near and the far settler colonies on this earth, from Australia to Canada to Palestine.
Thanks, Samah. Let me just go over the rules a little bit of our conversation today. My colleague Grafton Ross is in the background. He will be watching the Q&A. So if you have questions or comments or disagreements you want to put forward to Samah, please put them in the Q&A, and Grafton will monitor them. You may not get your exact question answered, but he'll see what the themes are and try to bundle them up for her to deal with. I've also enabled the chat function, so you guys can all chat with each other as well, but we will not be watching that on a regular basis. So if you have something important you want to share with Samah, please put it in the Q&A function. So now you mentioned that you were in Ottawa. In fact, you and I met in Ottawa about 15 years ago. Maybe that's a good place to start. How did you give us a potted history? How did you come to be in Ottawa, and how did you come to now be in Australia?
Yeah, so I came to be in Ottawa because I got married. We immigrated to Australia in the 1980s. Early 1980s with my family. And so my husband and we met in Egypt. He had a job in Canada in high tech. And so we came and we lived in Ottawa for 20 years. Had our kids in Ottawa. Beautiful memories, amazing people. I miss them all. I miss being part of that community. And then the reason I left, really, a lot of our lives as Palestinians is governed and punctuated by the events that take place back home. And it was after the 2008-2009 bombardment of the Gaza Strip that lasted for 3 weeks, that I decided, or that I started to feel this beckoning, this yearning to be with my family. And the reason this came about is because we were in Ottawa as a young couple raising young children, but we didn't have the extended family. We didn't have access to our, parents. The kids didn't have their grandparents. And during the 2008-2009 war, we were so scared that we would lose Munir's parents, my husband's parents, to the war in Gaza. And it just made
they're from Gaza. They were living in Gaza, correct?
They were living in Gaza. And I just looked at my kids and my life, and I thought, we are away from them because of the siege and because of the exile and all these things. But why am I denying myself and my family the ability to be together, and denying my kids to have at least one set of grandparents in their lives? And that's how I ended up moving back to Australia.
And your family is from Gaza as well? Your parents?
Yes, so my family is from the Tufah neighborhood, which is part of the old city, the old Gaza city, and it's part of the area that is it wouldn't be like I wouldn't call it modern. This is where the salt of the earth people live, people who have skills like crafts using their hands, making pottery. So these were the people that made up the majority of the people who lived in our neighborhood. There was, of course, my husband comes from the Rimal, which is the upscale neighborhood in the modern part of Gaza City. And his father was the mayor of Gaza for a few years in the 1950s and 60s. And so they had that history. And our families, I mean, Gaza is a very small place, but our families could not have been more worlds apart in the environment that we grew up in. And anybody who lived in Gaza or anywhere in the Arab world understands what I'm talking about. That one neighborhood to another makes a huge difference in terms of kin, relationships, customs, all the other stuff. Anyway, so we are both from Gaza, so we are not part of the majority of the population in Gaza who are refugees. This has been our ancestral home for generations, and so this hits at a very lonely level almost. I feel like everybody talks about Gaza and the devastation, and there are so many faces to this devastation. But at a very personal level, I feel like I've just been severed from the earth for the first time, that suddenly my ancestral home is no longer there. The land that's been farmed by Munir's family for generations is no longer there. And so this is kind of like our first Nakba, but everybody's already into their second Nakbas, and there's so much going on. There's really no room for that kind of expression, but it's really hard. It's really hard to explain that connection.
No, I'm sure I don't understand, or only partially understand. Canadians in general are not rooted to a place in the same way. I was born in Montreal, grew up in Toronto with kids in different places. It's not we might have a general connection to the country, but certainly not to the same place. When I visited your brother-in-law's farm, that's their spot that they've been there for, where their ancestors are buried and so on. It's a different attachment to the land than most Canadians have. Some, but most Canadians have different. Samah, I'm going to come back onto what's happening in Gaza now. But just so you went to Australia. Now you've had an very interesting career in Australia. I'm not big on Facebook, but I know you've written a number of plays. You've been very effective, very successful as a playwright. I believe you also got a university degree. You've been pretty active there. Have you been touring your plays in Australia?
Yeah. I got my university degree before I came to Canada. So what I got when I came back was the PhD when I returned.
Right.
And I really just did the PhD because I wanted to write my family story. I wanted to document. And it's really funny, the things that you're inspired to do that become almost incredibly important and much more important than you ever thought were possible. So the PhD was done to document the memory bank of my family's experiences, being in Gaza, growing up in Gaza in the 1950s and 60s. What was it like? The cultural life, the religious customs, the traditions, the streets. What did they look like? What did the houses look like? But through telling of a story. And so I needed the discipline of actually seeing this through. And that's why I applied to do a PhD.
And did you go back to Gaza and do some interviews? Is that what you did?
No, this is just using my father's, sometimes my mom's and my own memories, but really my father's memory and family documents.
Right.
And so I did it, and now that story will be published as a novel by Random Penguin House. Random House Penguin in September. So I'm looking.
Terrific. Congratulations.
Yes, I do put on plays here. I put on plays in Canada as well. I love writing for the theater. I do a whole lot of other things as well. I don't want to get into it, but anyway, I love art as a form of expression and as a form of resistance.
Let's turn our attention a little bit to what's going on now in Gaza, which is terrible. We all know a little bit, though we don't have the same lens on it that you do. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? How are you experiencing it? Help me and help us understand a bit the tragedy that's Gaza. How do you see it? How do you feel it?
So it's something that you feel at different stages of anger, grief, trauma, all of that. 4 months into it, how do I feel and what does it look like? I'm starting to realize 4 months into this that my white friends, my non-Palestinian friends, are actually having real mental health reactions and issues to this. And I say real because we all, look, guys, I too have survivor guilt, and I feel like I shouldn't even talk about mental health because there are people in Gaza who are so much worse. And so at this point, I just want to say to everyone, we're all in this. This is not just something that is happening to the Palestinians. This is something that we're all experiencing. And one of the things that seems to be a common thread that I'm seeing, whether be it on social media or when I talk to individual people, is they're actually feeling a real, tangible sense of grief. And what they're grieving, and it's important to identify this, is not the death of the Palestinian people or the injustice of the Palestinian cause. We've all seen this happen for decades. What we are all grieving right now is our the death of what we believed in was the system which governed the world we live in. We are grieving the fact that once we believed that our governments or that our countries or that our people or that our cultures, that they would never accept to see a genocide of this magnitude happen day in and day out. Whether you are a proud Canadian or a proud Australian or a proud whatever, you suddenly find yourself standing and saying, is this what I represent? And this epic human failure is impacting everyone alike. And what they want us to feel is this sense of helplessness, this sense of there's nothing we can do about it. I feel like I'm running on a treadmill and not going anywhere every day. But then I think that's because we have been somehow caught up into believing that we need to take action to see results right now. But that's not the way things work. The reason we're motivated to want to see things happen right now is because we want to feel good about ourselves. But if you're in this to make the world a better place, this has to be about the collective, which means that you have to give up on the idea that you are going to see results right now to every protest you go to, that every act you take and fails, it is not a personal failure. It is actually a way for you to know what to try next so it can be better. What this needs to mean for us this moment is more engagement, not less engagement, more faith and not less faith, and more support and love for one another. People get very edgy, people get very, even within the same household, we're faced with all this violence day in, day out. We have to remember we're all in it together. Look after each other. Look after each other. And this, I promise you, will be over. As to how I see it, if I took a few steps back, I am certain about two things right now. The first is utterly devastating. I am certain that Gaza has been destroyed. And that a lot of the places that I belong to, that define me, that tell my story, have been wiped clear off the map. But the other thing I'm certain of, which gives me reason to hope and to go on, is that it has never been better for Palestine. It has never been better for us as advocates for Palestine. People are engaged and want to understand and want to help and want to support. The protests around the world are showing that kind of solidarity that 10 years ago we would have just been dreaming about. So we may have lost Gaza in the short term, but Israel lost the future. The future is ours. And I think this is where my mindset is right now.
Let me just take a step back, because there are three wildly diverging views that I hear around. One is the view that it's the end of Palestine, that everything is bleak, it's over, it's gone, and so on. Another view is that, well, maybe now the two-state solution is going to be revived. Biden is now in favor of it, so maybe that will somehow work out. And then the third vision is that actually it's Israel has dug itself, the Zionist project has dug itself a hole so big that it won't be able to recover, and that we're into a totally new ball game. Do you see those three options, or you seem to have outlined one that's your view?
I don't see three options at all. I see three possible outcomes.
Oh, okay. I didn't mean options. I meant okay. So
but they're not options. Yeah. They're not options because Israel, for example, Netanyahu, since he came into office, he's been clear there's never going to be a Palestinian state. It's a non-starter. Not in any shape, not in any form. Even now, he says that what he wants is some kind of a limited autonomy, demilitarized, disconnected, Bantustan-like, that are under Israel's control. So that's where his mindset is at. The Americans want to revive the two-state solution because they like reviving things. Look at how they're reviving the Democrats every single day. They wake up and they revive Biden. And so it's just, the American foreign policy for the longest time has been about choosing stability over everything else, choosing the status quo, because it's been working for them for the longest time. So from the American perspective, yeah, let's keep on talking about the two-state solution. It's worked beautifully so far. Meanwhile, we'll just let Israel take whatever it wants to take. And so that's not an option either. That's just a possible outcome people talk about, but there are no pathways that show us that we are going to get to that outcome because Israel has blocked it from the get-go. Israel doesn't want to work with the Palestinian Authority even. They just want to bring their own people and put them into power. So what does that leave us with? That leaves us with a Palestinian torn body politic. We are fragmented. We are, and I hear things like, if only the Palestinians were united. And I find that really racist, to be honest. This blaming of the victims for their state of being so fragmented and so torn apart by the systems. And I'll give you one example. One of the things that people keep saying is if there was Palestinian unity between Fatah and Hamas, things wouldn't have gotten to this point. Why was there a disunity in the first place? There was a disunity because Hamas won the elections and because Israel and the US, who were paying the salaries and, putting food in the mouths of the Palestinians, said, no, we're going to boycott the result of this election. And even when there was unity for 100 days with a government of technocrats a few years ago, the Israel withheld the taxes that it was collecting from the PA. In effect, it was starving the Palestinians, which forced this unity to come to an end. So
you're talking about in the wake of the 2006 elections where Hamas won a
And
majority of, yeah.
yeah, the unity government, the was almost 10 years. I don't have the exact date, but I know there were serious attempts both by Hamas and Fatah to forge a unity government of technocrats. And every time it was Israel and the US that made sure that this never happened. Mm. And so, and you know, when you boycott the result of an election, you've in effect you've destroyed democracy. So how do we get rid of? I mean, they created this dynamic where we have Hamas in control of Gaza. Hamas is being boycotted. The elections cannot be held again, so we're going to have them forever because we're not allowed to have elections anymore. And then every time we have a unity government, so we can have elections, that gets thwarted by the US and by Israel. And so the whole idea that I'm trying to drive at is this: we're not going to be able, as a Palestinian people, to ever be able to envision liberation and freedom through the institutions that are being built and run under occupation, because it's just not going to happen. And the experience tells us it's not going to happen. Now, people will say 2 states, 1 state. Honestly, they make it sound like we've walked into this lobby and we've got a dish of 1 state solution and a dish of 2 states, and which one would you choose? And I think this whole mindset is not constructive. We need to focus on first things first. Our feet are held to the fire. Our people are dying every day. We have ethnic cleansing going on every day. So our priority to lead to any kind of a vision where and I mean, when you say a vision, yeah, all Palestinians are united on a vision. They all want to be free. They all want rights. They all want to be treated as human beings. So what do we need? We need accountability. We need accountability. We need rule of law. We need protection. And then we can talk about institutions. And then we can talk about pathways. But without accountability, there are no options. And there are no roads to anything. The reason Oslo failed altogether was because there was no accountability. There were no mechanisms to ensure that Israel complies with its obligations under international humanitarian law. So we had Oslo for over 20 years. Nothing happened except we lost more land and more lives and more resources. Accountability is the #1 thing that we need to focus on.
I'm going to ask you a bit more about how you see accountability taking place or being enforced. But before I do, I want to remind people, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A function. I see I haven't seen the text, but there's a lively chatter in the chat box, but not many questions in the Q&A.
What are they chatting about? Attention, you guys.
Also, I encourage you to ask questions of Samah that she can answer. Obviously, she's not in a very good position to answer questions about things that are happening in Canada right now because she's busy in her own country with her own thing. But I want to come back on accountability. I certainly don't disagree, but we know that there isn't accountability. At least I think I know it. There isn't accountability at the international structure right now, largely because the U.S. Finds it in its interest to support Israel. So all the mechanisms we have, votes at the Security Council, votes in the General Assembly, they amount to all the Declaration on the Rights of Human Rights and all those sort of things fall by the wayside because in the real world, the dominant power doesn't want to follow them. So how do you envisage, apart from a world united front against U.S. imperialism, how do you envisage a first step forward on accountability?
Look, nothing stays the same. So, we have the U.S. is supposed to be a powerful country today. I don't really see it as very powerful today. In fact, I see the U.S. as being extremely weakened because of its support for Israel. It's the friend that everybody is feeling awkward about meeting up with. King Abdullah's body language standing next to Biden, there was a lot of awkwardness. The U.S. is on its way.
Talking about the King of Jordan, who was met with Biden this week, right?
Yeah. So, just because something looks like it's powerful today, it doesn't mean that's going to be powerful tomorrow or the day after. And so when I talk about accountability, I'm not talking about a pipe dream. We have seen the beginning of this. We have seen countries that have started to divest. We have seen the South African claim at the ICJ. We have seen countries, not too many, but coming forward and trying to understand how they can be of help. It's not great, but it is actually huge when you think of where these people were a year ago, and what situation we're in a year ago. And so I think Gaza has changed the world forever. Gaza has changed all of us forever, because it suddenly became not about Gaza. A teacher who is from like Shepperton or whatever here in Victoria, he's aware that if he wears his T-shirt to school that says "I support Palestine" or just a Palestinian flag, that he might be told to take it off, and he might be told not to. Although the teacher that did that got a lot of good on yous. And so it's sorry, I'm getting that. So it's what we need to do is organize, work on divestments, expose the relationships between our governments, insist on our freedoms, our freedom to wear our T-shirts to work that say "Free Palestine" or "Boycott, Divestments and Sanctions," to hold up this cause, because it belongs to everyone now. Because if they can do this live on television to children in Gaza, there is no saying what these guys are going to do to all of you.
Do you think then, Samah, that leads me to believe that you think, was the breakout on October 7th a big success, or was it a big disaster?
I think the jury is still out on that one. It has been the deadliest and the most destructive in Israel's history. We know that. We know that Israel is never going to be the same, that it left its mark on the Israeli psyche, that it shattered the sense of security and trust, which is something that Hamas was very happy that it happened. But what does that really mean in terms of outcome? Triggering that great amount of fear, this existential panic, has actually pushed people further into confusing their instinct to survive as people, as humans, as Jews, with the survival of the state and the army. And, there became a conflation between the Zionist identity, stronger than ever before. There's always been one. Look at what they're doing to us. This is the worst attack on Israel since the Holocaust. So, I think we cannot downplay that psychological impact and that existential fear that it triggered in Israeli society, because it kind of, in a way, explains the lack of empathy, the lack of by most of Israeli society towards the incredible amount of death and destruction in Gaza. And so I don't think it's brought us closer. No, it's actually pushed people apart in a way that it's never been harder than today to try to talk about envisioning something to do with the future. But I don't see this as something that was the only outcome. I just wanted to get this out of the way up front. That it has caused this polarized view. But I want to also say that the economic cost has been incredible for for Israel. Its military spending is often the highest in the world, but now they're talking about it costing $26.9 million a day to run the war. 300,000 reservists have been called into service. There's a bit of a stagnation in all the other facets of life in Israel. The tourism is down, the shops are empty, the restaurants are empty. And things like you read places that the war has surpassed $60 billion in terms of overall spending for Israel. That if the conflict actually widens into the region and goes into Lebanon and into Egypt, that it could cost up to $50 billion, which would equal 10% of Israel's GDP. Now, of course, there's also the human cost of the, I think, 140 soldiers, I don't know the exact number, Israeli soldiers. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the Israeli cost to the war. In terms of the economic, thank you, American taxpayers. It's really not going to sting Israel all that much because you don't need to have housing, you don't need to have Medicare, but you can sleep happily on the pavements in the cold, knowing that taxes are going to pay for the genocide of other people who are sleeping out in the cold as well. So that's really what's stopping Israel from falling apart. It's this, it's the U.S. support, economic support, this war effort. In terms of Gaza, has it been worth it? Look, on the first day when we heard about this, we all just went, okay, we're effed. Excuse the language. Because, the mind boggles. Of course, you knew that Israel was going to retaliate. Of course, everyone in Gaza knew that something horrible was about to happen to them, because that's the pattern. And although they did feel happy initially, not happy because Israelis were being hurt, because they didn't see that on that initial day. All they knew on that initial day was that the wall was broken and that the prison walls were breached. And it's really important because people keep coming back to this and saying, they were happy that they were killing Israelis. They were happy that they were able to challenge this incredible imprisoned system that you have. But then very quickly, that happiness, very, very quickly, I'm talking in the same sentence. Wow. Oh, how did they do it? Oh, shit. What's going to happen next? That was the... and now most of Gaza is destroyed. I mean, the cost to the lives and to the city has been impossible to bear, impossible to justify. You're talking about half of the buildings and 2/3 of the homes in the Gaza Strip being damaged or destroyed. You're talking about the entire infrastructure being destroyed. There are no hospitals left that are functioning. There are no, except Nasser Hospital. God knows if it's going to be around when we finish this webinar. There's no universities. They just destroyed them. The houses that were actually left standing, they went in, like my in-laws' home. They went in, they looted the homes that were left standing, and then they torched them. Purposely, they just lit them on fire, made sure that every room burns down to the structure, so to make sure that people don't come back.
Didn't they? I think on your Facebook, you shared some pictures of your family's house where they had even put some graffiti on the walls or something like that.
So that's our personal apartment, mine and my husband's. So we have an apartment in Gaza apart from the family home, which belongs to Munir's family. And yes, they came into our apartment and they left some graffiti on the wall, Star of David on the wall, which I posted on Facebook. I'll get into that later, but I think the point I was making is that, and now in terms of human lives, we've got 100,000 people between dead, injured, and missing. Half of them are children, 2/3 are women and children. So the cost has been humongous. I don't think that I personally, I don't know, I know that people want to remain positive, but personally, I think that that this was a miscalculation to begin with. But I also believe that no one on this planet, apart from the war criminals who and the people who are cheering for this genocide, no one thought that it could get this bad without international intervention. No one believed that we'd be 4 months into it, 30,000 children killed. Stories that are so harrowing that you can't even imagine them in your nightmares. And the world wouldn't move. And on the day of the ICJ's provincial hearing, governments would rush to defund UNRWA. And so the size of the evil, I think, was something that nobody imagined that we would be up against. But all the more reason why we need to fight harder, and we need to fight with more strength and resilience, and to fight for the long game. I know that we may have lost Gaza, but I know that we've got Palestine and we've got the future.
Grafton, I'm going to turn to some questions from the audience. You've got one that you can pitch to us here?
Sure. I'll start with a challenging question, Samah. Why do Palestinians need a terrorist organization, Hamas, to insist on their freedom?
Yeah, so that is a really challenging question. Look, I don't want to get lost too much into definitions, but I'll say this. The Palestine Liberation Organization, who stood on the lawn of the White House, led by Yasser Arafat, and shook hands with Rabin, for the longest time was accused of being a terrorist organization. And for the longest time, the same language we're hearing today about Hamas was being used to describe the PLO and the PLO tactics. Rabin and other leaders in Israel are also labeled terrorists. And they, in fact, one of the people who was part of the Ergun gangs that were part of the ethnic cleansing in 1948 of Palestine became the prime minister of Israel. And so, yeah, we can just go around saying this guy's a terrorist, this guy is a moderate, this guy is that. These are things that are used to, I think, they are used in order for us to police the discourse and to control the way that we can imagine ways forward. No one would have thought that Rabin and Yasser Arafat, two people who were called as terrorists by the international community, would be standing on the White House shaking hands. This happened because there was a will to move forward. Who would have even imagined that today, as Israel commits this genocide against the Palestinian people, that its second biggest ally would be Germany? And we know what the history was in that country. So that's to address the whole idea of the way that we label organizations and politicians in order to shut down the debate and to shut down the ability to imagine moving forward. And we need to move forward. The second part of the question is, why did we vote? Why did the Palestinians vote for Hamas? Well, the Palestinians voted for Hamas, as is written in the books of history. And as I remember, because I was there during that time, it was a protest vote. It was a protest vote because in 2006, the Fatah faction, which was the majority faction in the Palestinian Authority, that was in power at the time. By 2006, they'd been engaged in negotiations with Israel for many years. During that time, they were being sidelined and humiliated, and settlements kept growing, and rights kept getting lost, and checkpoints were sprouting. The settlements actually more than doubled in that first few years after signing the Oslo Agreement and bringing the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, or inventing the Palestinian Authority, which was predominantly made up of Fatah. And so when we look at that kind of what was happening then, the Palestinians were like, okay, so it's either we vote for the status quo or we disrupt the status quo, and then, teach these guys a lesson, teach the international community a lesson, show them that we have some kind of a democratic voice that we can make effective. The right thing to do, and I was in Canada, I'd returned to Canada shortly after the elections. The right thing to do then was to wait it out for the next elections and then vote them out. That's what the Palestinians thought they were able to do. That's what the majority of Palestinians who voted for Hamas as a protest vote thought that they had the luxury of doing the next time around. The next time around never came, because despite Jimmy Carter saying at the time that the Palestinians, no one needs to teach the Palestinians about democracy. The elections were flawless. We've never seen anything so beautifully organized. We've never seen a people who yearn so much for democracy. So rather than invest in that, they just broke the ballot box, and they denied us democracy from that day on. And I have to also mention one more thing about the elections of 2006. The PA did not want to go into the elections because everybody knew in Palestine, if they were to go into the elections without having something to show the people, anything, a freeze to the settlements, an erasure of a few checkpoints, they were saying, give us anything we can show the people. And if anything, they took away from them by doing the withdrawal in Gaza, the so-called withdrawal of the Israeli settlements from Gaza, without allowing the PA to take any credit for it whatsoever. They could have said this was happening as part of some negotiations. No, they did it to empower Hamas and disempower the PA. And so, how do you navigate democratic spaces when everything that you do is being monitored, controlled, and when whatever the outcome is, the game is rigged. You're not going to win.
I think I remember that one of the slogans that Hamas was using then was that America says no to Hamas, Israel says no to Hamas. What do you say? That was apparently quite an effective campaign slogan. Grafton,
because they went into the elections. They had no platform except we are the protest vote. You don't like the other guys, we're the alternative. That was it. They didn't even have to work hard at it because people were actually voting out Oslo. In their minds, they were voting out Oslo's.
Yeah, I know several people in Ramallah said that they voted happily for Hamas at the time, but they're not particularly religious. It wasn't really what it was about. Grafton, another question.
Yes, Hamas is demanding the release of Marwan Barghouti, who some have called the potential Palestinian Mandela. Could he be the most credible person to unite Palestinians and negotiate with Israel?
Right. So the first part, the last part first, could he be the person to negotiate with Israel? I don't know. I hope that he does get out, but we won't know until he gets out. He's been in jail for a very long time. He's been disconnected, although he is very connected with news and so on, but it leaves a toll on you. So I don't know what kind of shape he'll be in. I hope he will be fine and healthy and able to take on some kind of a role leading the Palestinian people. As far as negotiations go, though, I do have issues with that. because from the very beginning, the biggest mistakes that Palestinians made were that they agreed to negotiate for all the rights that they were already entitled to under international law. The idea that we need to negotiate over what we're entitled to have only means that this negotiation is going to be reducing the ceiling of our entitlement, what we're entitled to have, and giving us always less than what other people are able to achieve. And I think that mindset is a colonized mindset. It's a mindset that says, I need to keep talking to the master, because the only way that I'm going to be able to get out of this hole I'm in is if the master lets me. But if you look at the civil rights movement, if you look at, the movements all over the world that ended slavery, that brought about social justice, that none of them happened. None of these rights were given through negotiations. These rights were given through protest. These rights were given through organizing together, through education, through raising awareness, and yes, through boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. And so I am weary of anyone saying that we need to negotiate. No, we know what the rights we have look like. We could negotiate once we get these rights over how we can run a country together. How do we coexist together? How do we continue to have autonomy over our lives while allowing the Jewish brothers and sisters to have autonomy over theirs? How do we do truth and reconciliation? How do we raise a new generation of Palestinians and Jews who are able to get beyond this genocide, who are able to get beyond this dark history? And that all of that doesn't start until we do the accountability part, and then we do the liberation part, and then we can sit together and negotiate how to coexist as equals.
Sorry.
Grafton?
Yeah, so does part of the struggle then for the liberation of Palestinians include the removal of the Palestinian Authority? And I guess if I could add to the questioner's remark, what would replace it? What would be the mechanism?
The removal of who?
Palestine, yes.
Abbas lately? Does anyone know where he is? Look, one of the people I respect the most in the world is Hanan Ashrawi. Dr. Hanan Ashrawi. She is somebody who I respect and love and listen to and pay attention to what she says. And there was an interview with her a year ago in which she was talking about, is it a good idea to do a one-state option to dismantle the institutions that were built as a result of Oslo, including the Palestinian Authority? And she made a point about that being dangerous because it would mean that we're giving up on achievements that we've made within the international community, because now we are recognized as Palestine. Which means that we have access to international tools that we could use. We have a voice at the UN, and that we could access bodies like UNESCO. We could access to protect heritage sites, etc. So she was talking about the importance of not destroying something that we've already achieved or built. And so I'm not going to negate someone like her voice, and it left me thinking, okay, so we know that the Palestinian Authority needs to go. I think it needs to go, but what comes in its place? And I think the answer to that is the Palestine Liberation Organization. This dead horse needs to be revived. Whoever is reviving Biden, if they can give us a hand with the PLO, that would be great. It needs to be effective. It needs to work. It is an important body. The PLO has a seat at the UN. Now, I am no expert in international law, but I as somebody who has experienced Palestine and living under the current arrangement, I think that the PA needs to not necessarily completely dissolve, but definitely leave and let let Israel pay for its own occupation.
So now I'd like to explore with you a little bit the question of racism. I often hear when I talk to people about the Israel-Palestine question, they say, well, they hate each other. They hate each other from the beginning. And my take on it is that it's not reciprocal, or it's not symmetrical. The Israelis do hate the Palestinians because they fear them. The Palestinians hate the Israeli state because of what it does to them. But it's not. I see it as white people could be afraid of black people, but black people don't have the same kind of reciprocal feeling towards white people. So do you agree with that, or maybe you see it differently?
In part, I agree with it. They're always projecting what we mean with what we say, and they think that we view them through the same prism. And you're right, there is an irrational fear. They really believe that Palestinians are about the zero sum, that it's just going to be either us or you on this land. Whereas Palestinians, for the very longest time, we're open and still are open to the idea of sharing the land. And that just because of the history of Palestine as a land that has been shared for decades, for generations, for centuries. And so the idea of coexistence in a place like Jaffa, for example, where you've had a port that was open to the world, it is not something that is far-fetched. It is possible. Even Gaza, like the research that I did on Gaza, for example, Gaza train station was a station where trains would stop coming, from Africa, from Egypt. They would stop in Gaza railway station, and they would go all the way to Akka in the north. And so, we saw all kinds of people pop in, the commerce, the trade. And so we are not caught in some kind of ideological existence, and we easily adjust to the different times and the different rulers. My dad said to my son, when my son was almost in tears, and said to him, Grandpa, how are you able to cope? And my dad just looked at him, probably thinking, you sensitive millennial child of mine. He just looked at him and he just said, "Tawadna," like, we're used to this. Why do we're used to invaders. We're used to people coming and going. We just want to live. We just want to trade. We just want to go to school. And we don't have an ideological mindset. Now, there might be an ideological mindset somewhere out there amongst minority groups or minority Muslim groups even. But I haven't experienced it, or not even when I went to Gaza just a few months ago. That's not how we think. That's not who we are. We're open. We're hospitable. We're used to coexistence. It's not a mind stretch for us to imagine that we can live together. But what we cannot do is live this kind of life where for 75 years, we are being ethnically cleansed. Our kids are being kidnapped from their beds in the middle of the night. Our houses, our history, our culture, everything is under fire. And for what? Because Israel needs, and Biden said it the other day as well, that we can't have a one state. We can't have equality because it would destroy Israel's existence as a Jewish state. And so to hold on to the idea that you need to purify the land that you're occupying from its inhabitants so that it could be a Jewish state, when a lot of people around the world who are or who are Jewish are just beside themselves. It's a horrible idea, and it's wonderful to see so many Jewish allies stand up and say, not in our name. We don't want that. This is not the way to go. and nobody's stopping Netanyahu. I don't know, I've just been rambling. Peter, I told you if I start rambling to stop me, but you've given me the whole.
Certainly not. Canada's not doing very much to stop. We also suspended our funding to UNRWA, and it seems that every time we seem to accept the Israeli version all the time. And I'm afraid even our press largely reflects the Israeli story without very much critical questioning. Grafton, have we got time for a couple more questions? Have you got them there?
I'm going to meld a few questions together. Samah, do you see the West playing any positive role in bringing justice to the Palestinian people? And should Palestinians call on the international community to use force to establish a Palestinian state?
Do I see the West having a role? Yeah, they are right now, they're having a role supporting genocide. And we need to change that. What I'm seeing that I am very heartened by is the growth of the Palestine solidarity movement across the globe, but especially in places like London and Copenhagen and France. And, the size of the protests has been bigger than anything else I remember in my lifetime. And so it's not going to happen right away. That role is not going to be positive right away. But we know that with time, street movements and protests, grassroots protests and movements that are so amazing, like the Palestine grassroots movement, with time, they yield political results. We have to be persistent, patient, and absolutely fierce in articulating the future that we're all fighting for. What was the second part of that question?
The second part was, do you think the Palestinians should call on the international community to use force to establish a Palestinian state?
Luck.
Pass.
Okay, I guess you've answered that. You've just spoken about the popular protests in the West, which gives me a segue into this next question. You may not be familiar with this particular incident, but there was a march in Toronto, I believe on the weekend or perhaps yesterday, that stopped in front of Mount Sinai Hospital. And apparently the protesters there chanted slogans. What is your take on this? What do you make of these kind of protests and the opposition that they're generating?
Were they like anti-Semitic slogans? Is that what you mean?
No, I believe they were slogans from the river to the sea, this type of slogan, but they were chanted in front of a Jewish hospital, which, according to our political leaders, makes it anti-Semitic.
Was the protest route running through that? I mean, I don't know enough about the incident. Was the protest route running through that street anyway?
I don't know. The Sinai Hospital was not something about target of the. Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, so there are two parts to it. One is that they were marching. That's the same street, Avenue Road, where the Israeli consulate and the American consulate is. So they were marching along Avenue Road to the American consulate, but they also stopped in front of Mount Sinai Hospital, and one person climbed up on the balcony, was waving a Palestinian flag on the Jewish hospital, which seemed to me to be kind of not
acceptable. Absolutely not acceptable. I think, look, people are going to have high emotions, especially 4 months on. I mean, people are going to be very explosive in their anger. They want to express themselves. They feel they're not heard. But that's all the more reason for us as leaders within the communities and people who organize protests to look out for one another. And when I say look out for one another, to look out for signs of people who are going to act in that way, and to talk them down from it, and then explain to them why this is not productive and wrong. In fact, if it's a hospital, and to try to really raise awareness around how we can do this together in a way that doesn't frighten others, and in a way that makes our allies, who are an important part of our protest, our Jewish allies, it doesn't make them feel threatened or unwelcome or excluded. And I think for the most part, the protests that we've had here in Narm have been amazing for me, because I could see in these protests what Palestine could look like. I could see all the different colors, all the different religions, people shouting from the river to the sea, and understanding what it means, understanding it's not about an exclusive outcome. From the river to the sea is about the freedom of this land that Netanyahu himself thinks is undividable. Held a map displaying it. This land, right? If everybody can be free who lives on this land, then we've done something. And so I think we have to be very, very careful to look after each other and to stop each other from committing wrongs, and to constantly raise awareness about inclusivity and working together.
Grafton, another question?
Thank you. What is it going to take to end this war?
Two things. It's going to take the same thing that we've been doing, which is the not giving up on the Palestinian side. We haven't given up. We don't have that luxury. So it's going to take Palestinians continuing their struggle, aided by their international global community, to boycott, divest, sanction, to work together to expose racism, to make sure that generations of Palestinians and Jewish people in the diaspora grow up understanding how to talk to each other without being racist, without being anti-Semitic, without being anti-Palestinian. That is the role we play. The other thing it's going to take is and this is really the primary thing, it is going to be for the most part, the responsibility of the Jewish people, because this is a government that speaks in their name, and we can only support the Jewish people in working together as a movement, in being allies to them in the same way that they're allies to us. But Israel has got to, that system of apartheid needs to collapse. That system of privilege needs to collapse. And once it's collapsed, and once there is accountability, we can do truth and reconciliation. And I see no reason why we're not able to get to that next part. And I see no reason why we need to be enemies forever.
Thank you. A number of people are wondering what we can do here in the West. How can we be most effective?
Plug into your local Palestine solidarity group. Find out what actions they've got. Be supportive. Find out what ways you yourself, each one of us, in which ways are we complicit with this regime that we can disconnect from? Are we paying money into a fund, a pension fund that is making money out of the genocide? Do yourself, clean up your own system, clean up your own dependency on things that are Israeli, or that pour into the Israeli occupation. This is at a very small level. At a higher level, find out where you are. If you're a teacher, if you're a medical doctor, how can you help with that skill set? How can you talk within your own circles, within your own colleagues? How do you bring more people? We need to see more people at these protests, not less. And my fear is that when the blood stops spilling, that things will go back to normal. But this is a fear that I have, that I keep telling myself, no way, because after all of this, we've all changed. And I hope we've all changed. So I think we have to be activists, all of us have to be activists. We have to know where our money goes. We have to work together, plug into the local group, allow Palestinians to be platformed, allow Palestinian voices to express in their own words, their own stories, and make sure that at every art festival, at every music festival, make sure that your voice is heard about who they're putting on that list and who they're excluding.
We've had, you might not be following the Canadian news very closely somehow, but we've had a whole series of very frustrating incidents where Palestinian voices and voices of people who are sympathetic to Palestinian rights have been shut down. There was a case here at the University of Ottawa. A professor was suspended. There was this last week, there was a group of Black activists who were invited to come and speak at the Supreme Court to a bunch of law clerks. And it seems that some of the law clerks found the fact that some of the activists had written some things in favor of Palestine, so they were disinvited. So this is spilling. There's also been fights at the school board here about whether you can have Canadian Palestinian flags in your classroom when there were already Israeli flags and so on. So it's becoming a larger debate within the Canadian society. And I can't help but feel the more they try to repress your voices and the voices of those who are supporting him, the more people they're going to make angry. So in the short run, it's very frustrating. But in the longer run, I think there is a backlog of frustration that's building.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you thought this had nothing to do with you, try to say something about it and see the reaction. And then you'll know that it has something to do with all of us, no matter where we live in this world. We've had people here being fired in Australia. We've had people losing opportunities. We've had people be put on lists, and the story goes on and on. And so, if anything, this is just a wake-up call that the lack of freedom the Palestinians are suffering from extends all the way to your settler colony and to where you are. And that same system that denies them their freedom is denying you the freedom to support them.
I'll tell an anecdote from my own experience. This goes back 15 years when I naively was wearing a Free Palestine or a boycott button on my coat when I went in to talk to a customer about a potential contract I was going to do, and he had been very enthusiastic over the phone. And after I came in with my Free Palestine button on my coat, that was the last I heard of him. So it took me a while to realize that people were paying attention, and we have to fight for our rights to defend human rights for Palestinians. That's
yeah, and don't be afraid.
Grafton, one more question, and then we're going to wind up here.
One of our participants asks, can someone please talk about Iran? And maybe I could expand on that question. Perhaps you'd like to talk about the various outside actors and Ansar Allah and Hezbollah, other actors that seem to be involved in this.
I don't feel I'm in a place that I can talk about Iran right now. I really just don't know enough about Iran. I've been very focused on my home city this last 4 months. So I'm just going to bow out on this question.
Yeah, I think it's better to ask questions within her domain of competence.
Okay. Well, I ask it because our listeners are interested.
Look, the only thing I'll just say very quickly, it may not be as specific and targeted as the person who asked the question. I just remember that when there was the war on Iraq in 2003, I remember that back then we discovered some kind of a paper, a strategy paper that was written for Netanyahu about how to control the realm, which is the Middle East. And in it, it was all about Iran and, attacking Iran as a strategic target. And the plan went, first we have to do first we have to change the leaders in Iraq, and then we roll back Syria. And that's how we get to Iran. And so that paper is available. It's called Securing the Realm, if anybody wants to look it up. And I say this because I would just want to say that Iran has always been seen as the boogeyman for Israel, but that's because it is a powerful country, and it does have influence in the region, and Israel wants to be the only big dog in the neighborhood. And so they've been singing that song for a very long time, but I don't have enough information about what's happening right now that I can share with you.
I'm going to jump in now and see it's 10 after the hour. Samah, you've really been very generous with your thoughts, your insights, your passion. We're really glad that you, first, I'm glad to know you, and I'm glad that you devoted some time to us here. We are, as you pointed out, we are in dark times, a lot of pain, and the pain isn't over yet. There are going to be people who are suffering physically from this and psychologically, emotionally for a long time. And yet at the same time, I have to hope that a solution to this has to come out. Israel comes out of this in much worse shape internationally than it was before. The global South has become very, very strong. Really, Israel's only defenders now are America, Europe, Canada, and even there, its support is quite shaky. I think that until the virus of the racism that is embedded in Israel today is dealt with, the kind of language we see from the Israeli leaders, which we see are also supported overwhelmingly by the Israeli population, that has to be dealt with. And it's not, you won't have a solution to this until the whole issue of Jewish supremacy is dealt with, and have to recognize that equality and justice and democracy. Samah, you get to say the last words. In fact, you even get to disagree with me if you want. You get the last words. We're going to wind up here.
I just want to thank everybody who's joined in. My friends, both in Australia and in Canada. I was just looking at some of your names. Thank you for joining, but really, more importantly, thank you for being my rock and my support. We're very lucky as Palestinians to have so many amazing people always supporting us, holding us up when we're going through hard times. Please don't give up. Take time off and then come back to the protests, but don't give up on the protests. We need your voices. We are making a difference. It just doesn't feel that way right now, but I promise you we're making a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much on behalf of all of us, Samah. And thank you, Grafton, for helping out with the questions. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks.